Hello, I'm Neige, and this is what we had to watch. Let's talk about Advent Children. Anyone with a passion for gaming can point to one franchise that takes them right back to the early days, to the first time they picked up a controller and got something more out of the experience than just a high score. And if you grew up in the late 90s, odds are that game was The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Unless you had a PlayStation, in which case that game was probably Final Fantasy VII. Or, I don't know, Gex? Considered by many to be a masterpiece, one of the greatest stories ever to span 3 discs, featuring memorable characters, an expansive world, and a killer soundtrack.
Dun, 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 dun.
Whatever your opinions of FF7 may be, you can't deny the influence this game has had. Because Square won't let you. If you were plugged into the gaming sphere around 2005, you might remember a sudden blitz of supplementary material centered around this title. A spin-off for the PS2, a prequel for the PSP, a mobile game from when mobile games had plots instead of microtransactions. All as part of the Final Fantasy VII compilation project. But the one element that got people most excited for this cash grab, expansion of the lore, was the movie. Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, a direct sequel rendered in revolutionary 3D graphics, as if to say, look, you know you only play for the cutscenes anyway, so here's 90 minutes worth. And when it was finally released and the fans sat down to watch it, through completely legitimate means, all of geekkind raised their voices in a mighty... For some, Advent Children was fine. For others, it was a convoluted style over substance nostalgia bomb that barely brought enough to the table to justify its own existence. And why is that? Video game movies may have a stigma against them, but you'd think a video game company would be the ones to finally crack the code, right? Well, apparently these guys couldn't, so let's see if we can figure out why. Disc 1, Cloudy with a Chance of Pain. Final Fantasy VII didn't need a sequel. I'm just saying, it didn't. People might have wanted one, but people also eat McDonald's. Doesn't mean it should happen. And I know that's strange to say, considering that half the movies being made today are sequels that nobody asked for, but I think it's important to mention that this thing didn't really need to exist. Very few sequels do, outside of monetary reasons, though I guess that's not really the case for Advent Children. It was just one part of a larger experiment to expand across multiple platforms. There was a lot of new technology being developed in the mid-2000s. Mobile gaming in Japan was way more advanced than whatever the States had back then. I think we were still on Snake. And Sony had just dipped their toes into the handheld pool with the PS... I can't say it, it's so stupid. Oh, I'm sorry, PSP owners. All 5 of you. Square wanted to explore these new mediums, and what better way to do that than by exploiting the unquestioning obedience of people who still think the greatest game of all time came out in 1997. And Square had been pushing the limits of computer graphics for years. A movie just kinda made sense at this point. It was never stated, but I think Advent Children was supposed to be the Toy Story of photorealistic CGI. Except people would care this time. Sorry, Spirits Within, I remember very little about you. Maybe that's where Advent Children's problems start. Story wasn't its main purpose, because there's no story left to tell after the events of FF7. These games are conceived as epics that allow the player to explore every corner of a brand new, expansive world, pending they have the patience for side quests. By the end, there's nothing left to see. But hey, that didn't stop Final Fantasy X-2 from happening. Let's give Square the benefit of the doubt. What did they come up with? It's 2 years later, and after the battle with Big Bad Sephiroth, the planet has begun to heal. But not really, because there's this new disease going around called geostigma that's kinda like cancer, but is also a metaphor for the ongoing struggle between the planet's natural life force and this evil alien parasite called Genova. There's this dude named Cloud Strife, a former badass mercenary turned badass delivery boy who, despite having saved the world, can't help but feel responsible for those who didn't make it out alive. Namely, gaming's original manic pixie dream girl, Aerith. Meanwhile, this gang of sexy gray-haired teenagers want to steal a bunch of kids because that will somehow fulfill Genova's will. It's on a much smaller scale, but the premise is a logical next step. Things have changed and the world is trying to adapt. And to drive that theme home, we have a character study of a character who was never really that interesting. There are several words to describe Cloud, but complex is not among them. His backstory, super complex, overwhelmingly complex. Kid from a small town joins the military and becomes a super soldier, which somehow gives him the memories of his dead friend, but maybe he's actually a clone, which gives this guy the power to control his mind, and there's also a talking dog. Rated T for teen. But personality-wise, Cloud is cool and kinda angsty. And for a video game intended to make the player feel impossibly powerful, that's plenty. But for a movie, it doesn't leave a whole lot to work with, so something had to change. Cloud is now mopier than ever. And this might surprise you, or maybe it won't. I am the guy who kinda likes Dragon Ball Evolution after all, but I don't really mind emo Cloud. And let's make no mistake, Cloud is emo. He always has been. It's just more obvious this time around because Advent Children is more character driven, and times had changed to accommodate more somber protagonists. Just like FF7 exudes the guns for arms Mountain Dew fueled ratitude of the 90s, Advent Children is a product of the mid-2000s, when geek culture had embraced the aesthetic of attractive sad people. Deny it all you want, nerds, but there has always been overlap between the anime club and the goth kids who smoke behind the bleachers. These days, we call it Hot Topic. You know, that place in the mall with all the Adult Swim merchandise. Can't leave the house without your 5 practically identical Death Note t-shirts! What the hell was I talking about? Oh, right, the reason people bought Kingdom Hearts. Before we get to that, let's talk about the subtitle. What does Advent Children mean? Well, the villains are the Advent Children, teenagers who believe they're serving a divine purpose. But the title also touches on one of the movie's major themes, how we allow the past to influence the present, or more specifically, how calamity affects the next generation. They're the product, the offspring, if you will, of larger forces. I guess you could call them Jehovah's Witnesses. Ha! The villains aren't just disenfranchised youth, they literally do not belong in the world. But in their zeal and tribalism, they find purpose, which they in turn offer to other misfits. Notice that most of Geostigma's victims are orphan children? It's subtext. Hey everybody, who wants to smoke drugs and listen to rock and roll? And in that context, Cloud is just another wayward son. It's been 2 years, the world doesn't need soldiers anymore because its greatest threat can't be defeated with swords. When the day was won, everyone else had a life to go back to. Tifa had her bar, Sid went to space, Barrett, who once fought against those who would steal the planet's natural resources, is now an oil man. I'll let that sink in for a moment. But any idea Cloud ever identified himself by has been stripped away. His hero Sephiroth went insane and Soldier turned on him. But hey, at least he was a great warrior. Oh wait, no he wasn't. He just internalized some other guy's life as a coping mechanism. Well, at least he can still fight the good fight. But then what? The only thing he ever knew no longer has value in the world he helped create. Advent Children is Cloud's quest for identity and purpose. Not to discover his lost memories, but to finally understand who those memories belong to. That's why he's constantly confronted with imagery from his past. Sephiroth, the Shinra Corporation. They were destroyed, but they're not really gone. Cloud still hasn't let them go. That's what his Geostigma represents. He has Genova cells in his system. The parasite that's killing him also made him a pawn in Sephiroth's plan to destroy the planet. Is he a hero? Will he ever be more than just an imposter or a puppet? His mind and body don't seem to think so. The planet itself is rejecting him. And all of this comes back to a single source: Aerith. She was the catalyst of Cloud's identity crisis. In the wake of her death, Cloud's identity as a first-class soldier is proven to be false. The memories he thought were his own actually belong to a fallen comrade. Of course, you couldn't save her. Who do you think you are, Zach? Oh, you do? Well, you're not. Here, enjoy your survivor's guilt. People may complain that Cloud is out of character, but the degree to which he internalized Aerith's death has always been there. Look at his dialogue from the game's ending. The very last thing he says. He's not over it. Killing Sephiroth was revenge, but now Cloud is finally seeking redemption. And this characterization is nothing new. Right from the start of the game, he's cold and distant, having just put Soldier behind him. He's always used isolation as a defense mechanism to avoid losing anyone else. Hence the not-so-subtle lone wolf imagery. The only difference is he's not angry anymore. He's just sad. You want Cloud the way you remember him? That's what the villains are there for. To remind him of who he used to be. And not just because they look like and kind of are Sephiroth eggs.
Gadash is a remnant of Sephiroth. Think of him as a sort of larval form.
Sure, why not? Indoctrination, blind impulse, these are things Cloud has lived through and learned from. He rarely throws the first punch anymore because he now understands the consequences of violence, while the villains don't understand, or simply don't care. He can't be the naive, arrogant swordsman anymore because so much of that was based on a lie he still hasn't completely escaped.
Good. You fight like the soldier you once claimed to be.
So yes, Cloud is mopey, and sure, the self-pity does get old fast, but he does rise above it. In FF7, he loses himself, but when the world calls upon him to take up the sword again, he finds himself.
There's not a thing I don't cherish.
He was never a first-class soldier, and he might not have been able to save Aerith, but he will defend what's important to him. And it's only when he realizes that he's able to forgive himself and move forward. Doesn't make the movie good. Disc 2, True Crisis. This movie's friggin' boring and confusing and weird! Okay, that was a bit of an overreaction. It's not offensively bad, I've just never come away from this thing thinking, yeah, that was a story worth telling. It has, for lack of a better term, identity issues, but I guess that's sort of fitting considering the protagonist. Part melodrama, part over-the-top action flick with a mythos so entrenched in metaphysics that you eventually give up on trying to understand it because it's been a week and you don't want to get another late fee from Blockbuster. Yeah, that's an old sentence. In other words, it's anime. Spirits Within was meant to trick you into thinking you were watching a live-action movie, with characters and cinematography that were bound by real-world limitations. But Advent Children doesn't want to trick you, it wants to blow your mind with impossible feats of badassery, physics be damned! The creative team even said so.
こんだけ滞空時間長くは飛んでられないとかっていう、そういうことは一切考えずに、ともかくかっこよければ何をやってもいいと。
So it's live-action anime that doesn't have to settle for the limitations of, well, actual live-action anime. The setting itself is very Japanese. A world recovering from a major disaster that has fundamentally altered the lives of the people inhabiting it. Japan kinda knows a lot about that. But oddly enough, this attempt to show us a new, permanently changed version of Gaia ends up preventing the movie from exploring any new ground. Other spin-offs in the compilation, questionable as they may be, were taken as opportunities to further explore characters and ideas introduced in the original lore. But Advent Children tethers itself to things we already know. And any new elements it introduces are overshadowed by blatant appeals to nostalgia. It's not so much a sequel as it is a really underwhelming epilogue. But anyone who played Kingdom Hearts 2 knows that Square was really into underwhelming epilogues around this time. Oh man, Simba still doesn't want to be king? That must explain why I'm fighting this giant piñata. Not to say there's nothing I like about this movie. The CGI is still impressive, the score is as iconic as ever. I think it's cool that Cloud has traded in one giant sword for 6 slightly smaller giant swords. And I really like this scene where we find out what Kadaj really is. It's not subtle by any means, but it is effective. And it's not that the good is outweighed by bad, it's outweighed by meh. Advent Children doesn't do enough to mark itself as a brand new memorable installment in this saga, I guess we're gonna call it. We have a new villain who's literally a low-calorie version of the old villain, and his new scheme is just a continuation of the old scheme. The second Kadaj gets swapped out for Sephiroth, the few attempts this movie made to expand on the lore become irrelevant. The new threat becomes the same threat, as if they didn't think we could accept Cloud fighting a different enemy. But even if he is just Diet Sephiroth, there are some interesting ideas surrounding Kadaj. Instead of a composed puppet master, Kadaj is a younger, far more reckless foil who flips the original Cloud-Sephiroth dynamic on its head. Now Cloud is the older, more experienced warrior, while Kadaj looks up to him in a weird way by calling him Big Brother. Kadaj is pretty much a bizarro version of Cloud, young, naive, arrogant, at the mercy of another's will. And the parallels between them further explore how we let the past affect our actions. Do you rise above your pain, or do you seek to inflict it on others? Kadaj may not be as cool or memorable as Sephiroth, he was never given the chance to be. But as someone who reminds Cloud of his past and highlights how much he's changed, he's enough. If they had fully committed to the character instead of just using him as a placeholder, there might have been a satisfying conclusion between them. But they can't tell a Cloud story without Sephiroth, so here's a skyscraper being cut in half. And many would argue that that's the point. This movie exists for the fan service. It's about the crazy, over-the-top action sequences and seeing every strand of Cloud's gravity-defying hair. To which I say, is it? Then what's with the subplot about the kids? Is Denzel part of the fan service? The character nobody likes? Why do they even need the kids? Kadaj keeps talking about a reunion, so you'd think they'd need as many Genova cells in one place as possible to bring Sephiroth back. But that's clearly not the case, so were the kids just their muscle? Cause nothing says security quite like a bunch of sick orphans who lie around holding their foreheads all day.
Well, Marlene, how does it look?
Like a badass. Fanservice may be Advent Children's greatest asset, but that's clearly not all it wants to be. It's debatable if the fanservice is even good. How much screen time do Sid or Yuffie get compared to Reno and Rude? Or Denzel? I'm just saying, there are simpler ways to get Cloud and Sephiroth in a room together, and none of them involve this kid. Just this kid, sometimes. Why did they even feel the need to add another kid to the mix? Was Marlene off limits when it came to afflicting a fake child with a fake disease? I guess that would mean giving Barrett more screen time, but this movie clearly isn't interested in Barrett. It's only interested in Cloud and Tifa and maybe Vincent. Yeah, pay attention to Vincent. But not too long or you might stop paying attention to Denzel. I don't mean to spend so much time on the kids, but why does the movie spend so much time on the kids? What purpose do they serve in Kadaj's scheme? Sephiroth's plan to become a god was convoluted, but it also hinged on a meteor crashing into the Earth. That's easy to wrap your head around. Here, I guess the kids will die and their Genova cells will give the planet cancer, but they were already gonna die anyway, so why is it important to make them drink the goo? What is happening? What is the implication here? Are the kids gonna fight? Is Cloud about to get mobbed by orphans? And even if you look past the shoddy exposition to just see the spectacle, is it good spectacle? Was it a good idea to leave reality at the door for the sake of more backflips and explosions? Suspension of disbelief has its limits. Unlike Advent Children, which defies your pesky limits. You don't get to tell me where to put the camera. Who cares if it's disorienting? It looks cool. The problem isn't the action itself, it's the way Advent Children sells it. The more fantastical the setting, the more important it is to have a consistent internal logic. So even as the world distances itself from reality, the audience can see that cause and effect are still at play. To illustrate my point, I present the following clip from Attack on Titan. Anime has a unique way of portraying unrealistic action. It's stylistic, but still visceral. And even as it pushes the limits of possibility, the high energy is able to compensate so you still feel the impact. By all accounts, this character should be dead. He's not, but there are clear consequences to the fall. He is bleeding from his face. But Advent Children's action often has no logical consequences. The very first action sequence, intended to establish what is and isn't possible in this fantasy world, ends with Cloud getting his goggles shot off at point-blank range. Boy, that was a minor inconvenience. When you shot me in the face. From there, it becomes one-upsmanship. Every fight scene needs to be more insane than the last, and every character, superhuman or not, is capable of these extraordinary feats. Again, not a problem in and of itself. It's a stylistic choice. But when the dial hits 11, you can't go any higher. The spectacle plateaus and the audience gets bored. And correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't Square's CG cinematics impressive for how not fake they looked? The appeal was the illusion of realism, not the defiance of it. I'm saying that I'm more impressed by Cloud's hair than how high he can jump, because one shows how far the technology has come, while the other reminds me that I'm watching a cartoon. These scenes are fun to watch, but in a medium without limits, there's only so much awe you can generate with Loz's incredible thigh strength. Similar feats appeared in the game, but there was always a clear disconnect between the fight segments and the story segments. 1 second Cloud is swinging a giant-ass sword around, the next he can't pull himself up from a ledge. The lines are often blurred, but there's still a distinction. Tifa is not actually capable of punching dolphins into existence, though this movie would be 10 times better if she could. Advent Children tries to bridge that gap, but falls victim to the same issue that's plagued video game movies for years: the lack of interactivity. In FF7, you had to put in work to see every limit break. The spectacle was a reward that the player earned. Knights of the Round may take an hour to cast, but that's a fraction of the time you spent breeding giant incestuous chickens. But here, the player's no longer responsible for what's happening on screen. This isn't a power fantasy anymore, it's just a quick time event without prompts. Sure, it looks cool, but it would be even cooler if I made that happen. But I didn't, and I have no point of reference for how amazing any of this is supposed to be because the movie doesn't provide one. On a scale of 1 to 10 of the awesomeness meter, how does this compare to this? The biggest offender is probably this shot from the Cloud Sephiroth fight. Let me start by saying that this is awesome, but at the same time, it really doesn't work. This super backflip is supposed to be a test of Cloud's strength and resilience, but nothing about the way he moves suggests that defying gravity is particularly difficult for him. Despite the insurmountable odds, there's no struggle. Nobody even takes battle damage. And I've heard the explanation. They ran out of time and money. They literally could not afford to blemish Tifa's porcelain face. They couldn't even afford to give Red 13 lines.
There are still children with the stigma.
You're British? But that just brings us back to cause and effect. In an action movie, if no one bleeds, where's the drama? Not in an abstract fate of the world sense, but in a more immediate life or death sense. What does Cloud have to overcome to achieve victory? Does he have to operate a shotgun with only one arm? Or rip his stitches and continue to fight anyway? He gets stabbed in the shoulder during the final act, but that clearly has no impact on his ability to wield a sword the size of an airplane wing. FF7 didn't have battle damage either, but it had a life bar, so every threat was quantifiable. The number 9999 was a big deal. Obviously in a movie that would look stupid, but normally a movie would also have cuts and bruises, things that appeal to our basic human nature, which Advent Children occasionally does. Giant things are scary, getting stabbed hurts, but we still don't have a clear logical backbone to support the action. By that I mean, no one freaking dies! Reno and Rude survive an explosion, just like Rufus Shinra survives an explosion. And his whole Phantom of the Opera act is apparently just for show. Where we're expecting to see some kind of permanent damage is just another gorgeous anime man. Sung and Elena, who were tortured to near death, not a scratch on them, making this awesome moment meaningless. Because God forbid we have concrete, irreversible evidence of what the villains are capable of. Meanwhile, Tifa gets taken out by a sucker punch, or whatever it is they're cutting away from. I can't tell, but hey, it was worth it for this cool shot, I guess. If somebody needs to lose a fight to move the plot forward, violence suddenly matters. But when it comes to actual stakes, this movie would rather undermine its own drama than sacrifice even the most minor of side characters. You know, like the Twilight Saga. FF7 had the balls to kill off a main character. Even if it wasn't the first in the series to do that, it was a bold move. But Advent Children doesn't want to take any risks. Everyone lives, Rose! Unless you're a bad guy, then you get dissolved in Aerith's magical Jesus reign. Even after Cloud performs the level 7 Hyperwave Omni/No Jutsu, they imply that even Sephiroth isn't dead. And that's after bringing him back to life a second time. So not only has Cloud never gotten rid of this guy, he probably never will. But that's fine. I personally like it when a sequel has to hamstring the original to justify its own existence. Who needs closure? We can milk this franchise for years if we want to. Sephiroth can come back every 100 years or so, and then a new incarnation of Cloud can defeat him, and you're not Legend of Zelda! I'm not saying that all compelling action runs on death, but constantly subtracting from the body count for the sake of a happy ending is cheap. Especially if we're expected to believe that Cloud, the death-proof gladiator, is gonna get taken out by a single gunshot, after surviving this. You don't want to kill off any main characters, fine. There are other ways to make engaging action, and Advent Children does occasionally have action scenes that go beyond the spectacle. This part of the Bahamut fight is dumb, but it's also not. There is subtext here. Up till now, Cloud's just been kinda half-assing it and feeling sorry for himself. But now he's taken up the sword in earnest. And now that the gang's all here, we see that his strength comes from his friends. There's more going on than just the surface-level middle finger to physics. It's grounded in something. And this is the first action sequence where we fully understand why things are happening. This movie has a habit of withholding information in ways it thinks are clever, but are really just kind of obnoxious. Hey, that guy kinda looks like Sephiroth. What's the deal there? It's a mystery! By the time Vincent shows up to fill the audience in, cause apparently Vincent knows everything, he's not completing the puzzle, he's finally showing you the pieces. Geostigma is autoimmune disease. Cloak Boy stole Genova's head. Buy my spin-off. And now with the magic of context, the action suddenly becomes engaging. When you're no longer wondering why something is happening, you can finally appreciate what is happening. Hell yeah, the band's back together and they're gonna kick some dragon ass, and oh my gosh, it's Sephiroth! And Cloud's gonna fight him alone, completely undermining the point the movie just made.
He can handle this alone.
Thanks, world's most obvious casting choice. This is one of the movie's most disappointing aspects for me. They reassemble the main party just so they can spectate. They don't even get to finish their one fight. We get this simple but still incredibly badass shot of Sid, Tifa, and Vincent all lined up, ready for battle. A group of 3 staring down a giant monster? It's a powerful image. As far as social dynamics go, these 3 probably have the least to do with one another. But it reminds you how a group of strangers came together to do something great. And now they get to sit around and watch Cloud do everything himself. Before the fight is even over, the movie has run out of things for them to do. Unless you count staying on the airship to rip on Yuffie.
This is man talk.
Sexist! Sexist!
Shut your mouth!
Talking Cat, you have the least reason to be here. They probably wanted to mirror the final sequence from the game where one big battle leads to a one-on-one fight. And fine, I will accept that Cloud is the only person that matters. But why go to the trouble of bringing these characters back and do nothing with them? Cloud wasn't the only one in the crater. Have your motorcycle chase, but leave Kadaj's flunkies to the main party. Let that shave down the numbers on both sides. Imagine this scene, but in the middle of it, Red 13 runs up along Yazu's motorcycle and Kate Sith latches onto his face. Wouldn't that be awesome? I don't know, but if you're gonna pretend the animatronic talking cat has something to contribute, give him something to contribute. It's better than Reno and Rude blowing themselves up and surviving while everyone else just watches the show.
He can handle this alone.
Why would you let him? Are there not more pressing matters than Cloud finding the will to fight again? And doesn't leaving everyone safely on the sidelines diminish the step Cloud has taken? For Cloud, fighting means risking failure, that someone he cares about might get hurt.
Maybe something will happen that can never unhappen. That scares you, doesn't it?
But when he finally confronts that fear, the risk goes away. He's right back in his comfort zone, where his go-to strategy of brute force always works. Nothing he cares about is in immediate danger, the friends he relies on are safely off screen, and the once intangible threat of Geostigma is now perfectly stabbable.
Cloud, you sure this is about fighting?
Well, it is now. Sephiroth is reduced to a glorified internal conflict, and the day is saved through the power of sequel bait.
I will never be a memory.
No! This ending sucks! That's ultimately where Advent Children loses me, and probably where it loses a lot of people. It's only Cloud's story, and it can't seem to get that story straight. Even as the protagonist of Final Fantasy VII, Cloud played a part in something larger. But now he is the something larger. The party reunites to become his cheering section. The world nearly ends so he can persevere. Sephiroth wills himself back into existence just so Cloud can learn to smile again. These characters and conflicts and groundbreaking visuals are brought together for a story that doesn't know how to use them. And the result is too safe to be memorable. Because no matter what could have happened, we already knew the planet was going to heal. The world gets a fresh coat of paint, everyone gets a new outfit, and hopefully this teases your nostalgia enough to buy Crisis Core. That's all Advent Children really accomplishes. It's not without merit, but it certainly doesn't live up to its potential. It just sorta is. I've thought of a present for you. Okay, this is happening. Your criticism is biased and uninformed. You clearly didn't watch the movie. Right, I didn't just describe the plot in detail or anything. I meant the complete edition. Nothing you say matters if you don't talk about the Blu-ray. I was gonna. When? Before you stuck a katana in my face? Oh. I want to give a special thanks to Baron J for composing that awesome one-winged angel sound-alike you just heard. He is extremely talented, so be sure to check out his channel and show him some love. I also want to take a moment to thank my 12,000 subscribers. I just hit that the other day, and wow, guys, that's insane, thank you. My review of Advent Children Complete will be coming out soon, but before that, it's the return of Pokémon, so be sure to stay tuned for that. I gotta go work on that now, so, bye.